how much are we going to dim the sun until we're living in complete darkness? Is that where we want to be going? The planet's kind of moving out of this stable state and it's shifting. And one of those key shifts is climate change. This isn't a problem for the planet. The planet's been in very hot states, very cold states, but it's a problem for us, right? It's a problem for us because we can only exist at a very narrow band of temperatures, right? And so now we're pushing outside of that band. We might think that this is going to make a small dent in our GDPs, but I don't think that's the scale of change that we're grappling with. What we're grappling with is potential civilizational species extinction events, Gulf streams collapsing, spinning us into an ice age. I don't want to sound crazy, right? But when you look at the science, it's quite scary where this could very quickly lead if we don't do something in this small window. So climate change happens in a place, but climate change happens to people in that place. And really what's important for us to understand is how do I relate climate change, these numbers, to what's happening in my body? What's happening in my children's bodies? What's happening in my parents' bodies? Are we getting more sick? Are we getting more vulnerable to various diseases? Are our organs starting to fail over time? Are we getting more respiratory diseases? You might not notice when you look from one day to the next, but when you look over a period of a number of years and suddenly you realize that actually living in a very polluted place knocks 12 years off your life expectancy, suddenly that's shocking. One of the most unfortunate things about climate change is that the people who contribute least to creating climate change are the people who are most vulnerable to the health impacts of climate change. There's a whole bunch of things in your life, in your job, in your housing that expose you more or less to the impacts of climate change. And the poorer you are, the more vulnerable you tend to be. So maybe it's worth thinking through some examples of people's lives. You know, like I might be sitting in a heat wave here in my office, turned on my air conditioning, and I work pretty much insulated from that climate. There may be somebody outside now washing my window, exposed to the sun, working out in the heat, unable to take the day off because it's too hot, because they don't get paid if they work from home, because how does a window cleaner work from home? And because of the way I'm adapting, it's making their life worse. Because I've put my air conditioning on, it's pumping out heat on the window washer just outside my window. So that's really very different experiences of the same climate. If you imagine you're a gig economy worker, you're working for an algorithm. The algorithm is toying with you. You're playing the rules of the algorithm's telling you, go faster, this is your ranking, do this to unlock bonus income, etc. And so you're rushing around town. You're having to work outdoors. If it's hot, you're exposed to those elements, right? And then you think about, how does this compound over the life course? So you think about students taking exams. The poor student hasn't been able to sleep for several days because it's too hot to sleep at night, going into the exam hall, suffocatingly hot. And then you think about the rich student coming from an air-conditioned home to the air-conditioned private school, doing exams in these kind of ideal conditions. Who's going to do better in the exams? Who's going to find that job in the air-conditioned office? Who's going to be the gig worker? And then you think about gender dimensions as well. In India, we have these rural health workers that go around from house to house delivering healthcare to people. And they have to wear these synthetic uniforms, work outdoors. They don't have access to toilets, so they don't drink enough to stay hydrated. When they come home to their modest dwellings, which have poor ventilation. They cook indoors when their partners may be relaxing and wandering around outside. There are certain traditional kind of norms around how they can dress, how they can behave, which again restricts their ability to stay cool. And so all of these things compound, right? And they compound through the life course, and at every point in your life course, you can see that it just gets harder and harder, and that kind of slow violence builds up, and then you find that people die much earlier. It doesn't have the kind of spectacular nature of a murder or a catastrophe. It's they had respiratory conditions, their heart failed or their organs failed, and it's just a condition of being poor. But it's not just a condition of being poor. Being poor exposes you to all of those compounding impacts of climate change. One of the big problems with the way we've organized our world is that there are a few people who benefit a lot from the status quo. A few people are able to extract a lot of wealth, either from extracting from the commons or dumping into the commons without paying. Cumulatively, this is driving us into this position where we're destroying our common home for the profits of the few, who may then escape to Mars and find another planet. But governments are obviously interested in protecting populations against climate change. They want to do something for the majority. And they often do that in collaboration with business, right? And so they'll try and find some kind of win-win solutions where the businesses that fund the governments can participate in the actions that we're going to help us adapt. One of the interesting ways that government have thought about dealing with climate change and are toying with now is this idea of geoengineering. What if we could use a techno fix to change the Earth? Is this idea of pumping chemicals into the atmosphere that reflect sunlight, that basically dim the sun. The government in this country has invested, I think, £50 million in doing some trials on it. They call it the Pinatubo option.
3 powerful explosions sent molten rock, mud and ash more than 10,000 feet into the sky. And within minutes, falling ash turned day into night.
Because when Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines erupted, that threw up a lot of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere and it cooled the Earth. Now this obviously interferes in all sorts of Earth systems. It can mess up monsoon rainfall, it can change harvests, it can disrupt the kind of difference between daytime and nighttime temperatures. I think it's a very dangerous thing to hope for these large, untested technologies to be rolled out on a massive scale and disrupt the Earth's ecosystem in those ways. And it's something that doesn't fix the underlying problem of overconsumption, of destroying the commons. We're still going to be creating those problems. How much are we going to dim the sun until we're living in complete darkness? Is that where we want to be going? We need to think ecologically, how do we live together, not how do we terraform the Earth? In my own research, I do a lot of this kind of micro-simulation modeling, kind of complex modeling of how policies change people's lives and their trajectories. And there's a lot of maths involved and there's a lot of computer programming involved. And I wanted to share some of those ideas of a kind of complex model of how the world works and how to intervene in it with my students. But I didn't want to spend all term teaching them about computer programming. And so I found board games to be a really useful tool to jump straight into the ideas. Games are an interesting way to think about systems. Who are the players? How do they interact? Well-known games that a lot of people play as children are very competitive. They're very zero-sum, that you benefit from other people's misfortune. They encourage hoarding of resources. They encourage resource extraction. They encourage destruction of the commons. They're almost a training ground for how to destroy the world. But when somebody tells you that you can change the rules, you can change the system, what are the rules of the game? What does winning mean? What does losing mean? It's one thing to be critical of how the world is, but it's something else to actually have some ideas about how to make it better. Often people who work in climate change are accused of being watermelons. You're green on the outside, but really what you want is you want to push a socialist agenda. You're trying to change society, and you're just using the environment as an excuse. And I think we need to flip that around and say, look, if we want to fix the environment, we need to fix society. We need to live better with each other. And so I think we need to embrace that watermelon, in all its ways. People are often told that it's inevitable. Inequalities are inevitable. Climate change is inevitable. But I think one of the important things to realize is that none of this stuff is inevitable. A lot of it it's decided by societies, right? These are our social values. We've decided that some people will be poor, some people will be rich. We've decided that this is how we organize our economy. This is how we value production. And suddenly when they're told you are significant, what do you care about? Imagine you're the person in power, fix it. I think that's quite powerful. And I found with my students, it sparked some hope to realize that actually it's not inevitable. We're not going to just end up in this horrible doom situation. We're not all shopping ourselves to death, right? There's other ways of being, and I think that's quite exciting.